it should. I mean, you know what I mean? It's what it is. You can't really.
All right. So I feel like all I've been doing tonight is interrupting great conversations. But I do want to start to wrap things up. And there are a couple things that have come up that I wanted to make sure to talk to everybody about. Because if more than one person is asking about it, it tells me that it is something that people want to know and that I have not talked about. So, but yeah, again, bottom line, just like with the games, is hopefully having gone through this process, you've gotten some good, useful feedback about sort of where your project is and some next steps. Just like I said with the games, you can take every bit of advice that you've received from people with whatever grain of salt you'd like. If you really feel confident that something you're doing is the right thing to do, and somebody else has said you should do it differently, then don't feel like you have to do it differently just because someone else told you to. So just kind of examine everything. A lot of the questions I've gotten, and I start to feel like a broken record in some cases. Always go back to your instructional design. What's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? And all of this should be about what is the best way to get to that goal. So, do I need to use every activity that Moodle offers? No, because not every activity in Moodle is going to be the best fit for what you're trying to do. So if you only end up using 2 of Moodle's activities, but use them a bunch of times, if that's the best fit for what you're trying to do and for your audience, then that's what you should go for. The rubric, I do separate out in the rubric what I call, I forget what wording I use. It's like external content and internal content, basically content you've created and content that you've drawn from outside. So I do separate those out when I'm looking at your projects, but there's nothing that says you need to have at least 40% of your Moodle be original content, because I just feel like that's too restrictive and kind of goes against one of my main philosophies about the use of technology is you should use the technology that's best for your situation. So it should always boil back to that.
Can I just ask something? So I found some things online that I liked the way it was presented. So I was able to copy part of that, and then I would edit it to what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay to do?
Yeah, well, I mean,
It's not really.
obviously, if it's depending on how much you've drawn, if you want to, it might be worth crediting, saying.
Well, that was my question.
Yeah, certainly, there's obviously a lot of leeway that's given in the educational world in terms of borrowing materials, but I also feel it's good if you're drawing somebody else's structure, somebody else's work, to at least credit where the information was drawn from and say,
So I can put, like, source on the bottom.
Yeah, like based on a web, based on this web page, or based on information provided by, or something like that. But I think that's just good practice, because then everybody borrows, and somebody may come to your stuff and say, I really want to use that, and you would want to get some credit for what you've done there. Obviously, none of these actual Moodles aren't going out into the broader world, so in terms of that, I don't think we need to worry about it. Okay. So the biggest thing that I realized I haven't talked about explicitly, and I got several questions about, is just a basic sort of formatting issue. So a lot of people have noticed when I set up our wikis each week that obviously I've got the title for the week, but then I've got these headings, subheadings within a section, and a couple people have asked about what those are. Those are, from Moodle's perspective, that's what they call a label. And a label resource is simply, all it is the title. There's all the other things, you've got the title, and then you can have a description, and then you can have the content. All you get is one text box, and that's just where you put in text. And that is what shows up in those contexts. So you can format the text and so on, just like you can other texts. But what I do is just create those labels. And then the other thing that I like to do is this indenting of content, where once I have a label, I just think visually on the page when I'm not in editing mode. Editing mode kind of messes it all up because you get all this other stuff. But any content, once it's there, if you go to the edit, you'll have these options of move right or move left. And it's just a series of tabbing things over left and right on the page. It doesn't do anything about the hierarchy or change the content or anything. It literally is just about formatting it on the page. So I just find that really useful just in terms of visual presentation when I'm not in editing mode, so that when you look at a week, you very clearly kind of see the headings, and they're all the way over at the left, and then the content that goes under those headings is moved over. And sometimes under homework, I might even then further move things over if there's like, here's the overview of the homework, and then here's additional things to go with that. So you can feel free to play around with that in terms of just the visual presentation on the page. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, I was writing something. Where did you go to get the label?
This?
Yeah.
That it's a label. So when you're in editing mode and you've got that list of resources, it's the label resource. So the same place you'd get a file or a page or a URL label. And the label is super simple because all it is the label text.
Oh, okay.
There's no other boxes to fill in. So just whatever you put in there, you can do the basic formatting and all that. You can even embed content into that too. So if you want to put a picture in there or a graphic or something like that, you can do that also. But that will just show up as just a thing there. They can't click on it. You can't do anything with it. It's just there as a label. So that came up from a couple of different people, so I thought it was worth talking about that. All right, so to just kind of wrap up our marathon night of 5:30, 5:20, 5:52, 7:63, I don't know, whatever else. In terms of I say week 9, but obviously that means 2 weeks from now because next week doesn't count. So as I said, the topic for this week, if this had been just an online class, we would have been dealing with online assessment. So we are going to cover that this week, but I'm leaving that for you to do asynchronously outside of class. So there is an article. The article is actually directly from Moodle. So this is Moodle's own sort of addressing of the issue of online quiz strategies and things. So it talks, a lot of it revolves around, and this is no big surprise, but about security, test security, because that's really the biggest issue related to online testing, is if you are not there in the room with the people taking the test, how do you know that the answers they're giving are their answers? So they give some strategies for ways to structure online assessments that can help address some of those issues. It's never going to be perfect, but even when you have the kids in front of you, it's never perfect. They could still be crib sheets or whatever. So read the article. And then I also give you a link to the Moodle page about the quiz activity. So if you want to use a quiz activity, it's just kind of all of their tutorials about how that activity works. And then our fourth and final production forum is a little different this time, in that what I've done is I've already generated 4 discussion topics. Each one is a question in a particular subject area, a question that might appear on a test. And what I'm going to be asking you to do is to look at each of those questions, and based off of what you read in the article and your thoughts about online testing, is to rework that question or to make suggestions about that question that might make the question work better in an online environment. So it could be changing the question itself. It could be making suggestions about the format that the question is asked in, anything you think that will help improve that question. It could even be just, this is not a good type of question to ask, so you might replace this with this type of a question that would be better to ask in an online environment. The tricky thing is, I don't want you to add your own discussion topics. You're going to be creating replies to the 4 I've already created. But the tricky thing is that unless you're the very first person to post, other people's responses are going to be right there too. Try as much as possible to ignore other people's responses until you've made your own, just so you're not influenced by what other people have said. For me to get around that, I would have had to have created a much more complicated activity, and I didn't want to do that. So I'll just kind of leave it up to you, to look at the question. I mean, like, for example, this one, number 4, math. the question is simply solve the following equation, blah, 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 blah. So this might be something that would show up on a test, but what you want to do is say, well, what might be the issue of asking this in an online test, and what might you suggest as solutions to address the same concept, but do it in a way that would be better suited to an online environment. So you would create a reply right here, but obviously other replies will already be there, so just do what you can to kind of ignore them until you post your own. So you don't need to be replying to other people's replies. It's not like our normal conversations. This is more along the lines of the ones where you were uploading a video you made or uploading the audio you had done. So I'm calling it a production forum. So that's the activity related to assessment for this week, is to just kind of think about that, because you will need some kind of an assessment piece at least in the end of your Moodles. And if you want to use the Moodle quiz tool, this will give you some tips about that. Or if you're going to use some other assessment tool that you have access to, like a Microsoft form or something like that, this will also give you information about structuring online assessment. And we'll do a little debriefing about it next time too, so we can talk about your thoughts and so on.
Can you insert Google Forms into
Yeah, you can. Google Forms, I believe they provide embedding codes for Google Forms. I think most Google content, we don't use Google in our district, but my understanding is that just like a YouTube video will give you an embedding code, so that will actually embed it right into your page. At the very least, it will generate a URL that you could put in, and they could click on the link, and it would take them to that. I know with Microsoft, that's how it works. We can either embed a form directly into a web page, or have people click on a link, and it takes them to that form to fill in. So that's kind of piece one. Piece two, no big surprise. Keep working on your Moodles. At this point, like I said, especially with this assessment piece, you really should have basically your full toolbox now of all the things you need to know to do. So now it's just using the feedback you got this week and incorporating that in and just continuing to build out the content. Because we are, again, roughly, I have to look at the overall timeline, but we're roughly about a month-ish out on this project. These are actually technically due before the end of the course, because I want to have a chance to be able to assess them before we go away. And the last couple weeks of the course are going to be about our presentation. So, but, so timeline-wise, figure you've got another at least 3 or 4 weeks to be working on this. So, so we're there. I will say, I meant to say this at the beginning, just like I'm planning to go over the POW tunes over this next 2 weeks, I will be doing my next round of feedback on your Moodles. So sometime in the next week or so, I'll be posting another thing to that discussion at the top of your Moodles, so that I can give you some feedback as well in terms of what I'm seeing. So that's that. And then the only other thing, as I mentioned earlier, that presentation project, since everyone has now suggested those 3 choices, except for the 2 people that, was it Padlet? The 2 people did.
Yeah,
So, but other than that, everyone looked like they had unique things. So of your 3, pick one that you think you would most enjoy talking about. And if you're not already familiar with it, if it's a tool you haven't used or don't have a lot of experience with, just start becoming familiar with it. And then next class, I will talk about the specifics of how you're going to start developing the lesson that you're going to teach for that tool and how to use Zoom. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you guys have been at least working with me in the WebEx environment, Zoom is not all that different. I think I said this last time, the reason we go with Zoom is because anybody can open a Zoom account for free. And as long as you don't have, I think, more than 50 people or longer than half an hour, there's some limit to it if you're using it for free. But it's just an easy way for us to give you access to a web conferencing tool without asking you to pay money for it.
I think the limit is 40 minutes.
Is it 40 minutes now? I think it used to be shorter, but I think they've lengthened it
Still
now.
not quite the length of an actual class, which is what I think they're guarding against.
Yeah, but for these presentations are only designed to be like half-hour presentations, so we keep it under that.
And the purpose is to teach.
Yes, you will be teaching your Web 2.0 tool to the rest of the class, just to get that experience of what it's like to be sitting on the other side of the camera, talking to a class full of people you can't see. Well, you don't have to, but like what I do with the WebEx, they'll
Yeah.
see your screen.
Right.
You'll want to have things you want to do.
Okay.
You want to figure out how to
Yes.
have your students interact with the content and have them learn what you want them to learn and all that good stuff. All right. So I think that covers it. And again, thank everybody. Thank you all for your flexibility in terms of combining 2 and 1 tonight. I was trying to save you all the double trip to campus,
It
so
was great.
Yeah, I
hopefully it all
appreciate
worked out. And again, in the greater scheme of things, now looking at what's happening, I think we've got a lot of good information on both classes, on a lot of major projects in terms of feedback, and a good path forward from here. So this was I'm really glad we're not Southern and that we got tonight in,
I know, right?
because now I think we're in a good shape. I could cover anything from here out to the end of the course in an online environment if we needed to, but I think it was really useful to get this, at least this one in-person night.
And
on
so
both
if we have
fronts.
next week's week, so it would be in 2 weeks that we might have a synchronous class on.
In the gaming class, yeah, it would be the Wednesday. Tuesday, again, I have to look at what the next topic is in here, but I might be able to cover this class just through asynchronous work. So, but yeah, I will step up my communication because we are now in this very fluid environment.
Okay.
My communication in terms of what each class's plan is for each week, and I'll try to get those plans out as soon as I kind of know what they're going to be in my mind, and as soon as we get communications. I mean, obviously we're covered out to April 5th at this point, but if they start extending that out beyond that, we'll just, I'll just keep staying in touch with everybody about what we're doing.
Okay.
So yeah, we've got Remind, we've got Moodle,
Inside
we've
our
got,
Moodle, that where you gave the feedback the first time, right? That's where you gave.
yes, that's where I'll be
That
doing the
one.
next round. I'll just
Okay.
continue on in that dialogue
Alright.
with the next round. So,
Alright.
all right, thanks everyone. Look, it's 7:59. I beat it by 1 minute. We made it.